I'm joined on the line by Jeenah from the Mapungubwe Institute. He's a senior researcher there. Naeem, a pleasure to have you on the program despite the circumstances. Can you provide an overview of this incident involving the Israeli airstrike on the Gaza school? What details are confirmed so far and what remains uncertain?
Well, the attack took place yesterday, and this school, like most other schools in the Gaza Strip for months now, have been operating as shelters for refugees rather than as schools. Many of these schools have been repeatedly bombed. Yesterday's bombing, the Israelis dropped 3 2,000-pound bombs onto that school, killing at least 100 people, hundreds injured, and scores at least buried under the rubble, so also presumed dead, many of them. But the past 10 days, from the 1st of August, has seen 10 or 11 schools now being bombed by Israel in the Gaza Strip. All of these, of course, housing refugees, people whose homes have been bombed and they have taken shelter in these schools. The schools that Israel has been attacking are schools that either are run by or were run by the government in Gaza, or even United Nations schools that have been bombed. Now, the bombing of these schools is not about the school. It's about really making the Gaza Strip unlivable for people. And so in many of these areas, in Khan Yunis, for example, people were told to evacuate to that area because it was a safe area. After they got there, within a day or two, they were then told to evacuate it to another so-called safe area because it was going to be bombed. And so all of these kinds of attacks, forcing people to be displaced, bombing places that they take refuge in, etc., is all part of the unfolding process of genocide that is taking place.
So in my intro, I mentioned the countries that have reacted to this crisis. What has been the international reaction to this airstrike, and how has it affected diplomatic efforts, especially for a ceasefire there?
Well, I mean, the way that you introduced it was correct. You had all of these countries that condemned the attack, and then you had the United States, which expressed concern. And so this is what we're finding increasingly, that the rest of the world is horrified at Israel's genocidal actions in Gaza. But it continues doing so because or it's able to continue doing so because the United States protects it. You listen to Kamala Harris's statements, you listen to statements by Joe Biden, etc. It's always prefaced by this notion that, well, Israel can go in and kill the terrorists, but the civilian thing is not good. There is absolutely no justification in international law for bombing a refuge where people are staying for safety. Even if they were correct, and no evidence has been provided by the Israelis, as is usual, they don't provide any evidence, they just make claims. They claim that there were few Palestinian fighters in that school yesterday. Even if that were true, even if the number, even if half of the 100 people were fighters, that is, in international law, no justification for attacking a place of refuge in this way. Yet the United States is not going to do anything about it. The 3 2,000-pound bombs that fell on the school yesterday were supplied by the United States. Today, or yesterday rather, they just signed off on another $3 billion weapons aid to Israel. So unless the United States actually puts some action to its expressions of concern, this will continue and the genocide will get worse. And the number 40,000 will go up to 60, 80, and 100.
So Hamas has labeled the strike as a dangerous escalation, and Hezbollah has also called it a horrific massacre. How do these reactions also reflect the broader regional tensions and alliances in that region?
I'm not sure about Hamas's dangerous escalation. I mean, in 10 days, you bomb 10 schools. I don't know how the last one is just an escalation. But in terms of the regional scenario, I think that Israel is really escalating on that front. I mean, in the past week or so, we've had 2 assassinations in Lebanon, one of which was in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, of a Hezbollah commander. Then we had the assassination in the Iranian capital, Tehran, of the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh. And it seems that the Israeli government is determined to plunge the region into a war. And part of the reason is that they believe that they just want a war that they can beat everyone at, and I think that they're wrong. They have not been able to beat a group of militia in Gaza with homemade weapons. They're not going to win against an Iran. But nevertheless, the other objective of this escalation is that they want to pull the Americans directly into a war, particularly with Iran. And so this escalation is taking place. You remember in April when they bombed an Iranian consulate in Damascus, in Syria. And so they're continually escalating, hoping that Iran will take the bait and respond in like manner. The Iranians don't want a regional war, and they've been holding back. In April, you might remember, the response to the bombing of the consulate was a symbolic one, not a real one. But right now, I think we're at the position where, literally by tonight, we could see the beginning of a regional war. And if that happens, I'm afraid that the region would be seeing the effects of that, or even an ongoing war for the next decade or so. I think it's a very dangerous point in the region. But from the Iranian perspective, they're in a corner. If they don't respond, then they seem weak and pushovers for the Israelis. If they do respond, the region goes into a war, and they're in a kind of no-win situation. What they do over the next couple of days, I think, will be decisive. They have made the point that they will not respond to this if Israel agrees to a ceasefire in Gaza. So that's a possible way out. Whether the Israelis will take it is unclear.
But how has the timing of the strike impacted ongoing mediation efforts and the push for a ceasefire?
The push for a ceasefire is... more than a month ago, you remember that Joe Biden announced that he had an Israeli proposal for a ceasefire. He announced the proposal. Within hours, Hamas accepted the proposal. Israel, on the other hand, has to date not accepted the proposal, which is supposed to be its own proposal. It has not accepted. And in the past couple of weeks, they've put conditions on any possible ceasefire that makes it impossible for any Palestinian to accept. I mean, the conditions for ceasefire essentially mean that they reoccupy Gaza, that they divide this narrow strip, 36 kilometers long, 10 kilometers wide, that they divide it in two, that they control its borders fully. And that kind of thing is not going to be acceptable to any Palestinians. If Hamas and the resistance groups in Gaza accept it, they'll have a rebellion from the population. So Israel is intent on not having a ceasefire, and is intent on plunging the region into a war. What is the way out of this? It's difficult to see. I mean, the Iranians, as I said, have provided one way out: stop a regional war by having a ceasefire. Let's see.
But Israel's response is also very interesting, if you will. The Israeli military claims that the strike was aimed at militants. What evidence or even arguments are being presented by both sides regarding the legitimacy of the targets?
No evidence. I mean, the Israelis have not, and this is not the first time, of course, they've bombed numerous schools, numerous hospitals. Almost every hospital, I think there's 2 hospitals out of close to 40 in Gaza that are still operational. Very limited operational, but still operational. The rest have been bombed to smithereens. And every time they bomb a hospital and kill patients, and they go in and take babies out of the incubator. I mean, this is not libelous. This is real. We've got footage of it. Take babies out of the incubators and allow them to die and decompose. They claim that they bombed the hospital because there were so-called militants there, because there was a tunnel with fighters in it, etc. They don't have to provide any evidence. They don't provide any evidence. And yesterday, more than 100 people killed. They've provided no evidence except that they say so. Because Israel says so, the rest of the world has to believe them, it seems, and they're quite happy with that kind of a line, because even if the rest of the world doesn't believe them, the United States makes excuses for them. And so you'll see that Harris has now expressed concerns. The next thing is that if they want to take a strong line, the Americans, they'll ask the Israelis to investigate the attack. So you ask the perpetrator to investigate his own crime, and that will be the end of that. So, even if the rest of the world condemns it, demands evidence and doesn't get provided it, it seems not to make a difference as long as the United States supports it.
Thank you so much, Naeem Jeenah, really sharing valuable insights into the recent airstrike on a Gaza school, but also speaking to the broader implications. It's been giving us a snapshot of the situation in that particular region.